Simon Birk, I'm the Executive Officer of Mental Health Community Coalition, and delighted to be here today for this event. Now, before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on vulnerable land, and I pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and future, and acknowledge their continuing contribution to the city and its region. The housekeeping, toilets behind here, emergency exits out the door you came in from. We will break for morning tea, aiming for 11 o'clock. And there will also be lunch and afternoon tea, which also means that there are plenty of opportunities for people to slip in and out during the day as you need to. Please be aware that we are live streaming this event from over here. This is a bit of a first try for us as well, so we'll just see how that goes. That also means when we get to the point of asking questions, etc., to please, people can speak up loudly so both the speaker can hear and hopefully the people on the other end of the live stream. If you do not wish to be recorded or have your photo taken, please let one of the MHCC staff know. A bunch of them will be wearing these sort of orange lanyards and cards, just so we can make sure that the photos we take, etc., that you're not in them. So, we are here today to launch the report, which I should blow my copy off. There we go. So we're here to launch this report, which we are quite excited to have produced. When the NDIS came to ACT, the story of hope and disruption in the mental health sector. Copies of the report, of course, so you've got an opportunity to look through it and take it away with you and have a good read later. So what we're doing today is the sort of formal part of the launch here in the morning, and then we're going on to other presentations, panel sessions, etc. later in the day that explores the themes and the experiences in more depth. There will be experiences both from service providers, and from consumers, and from carers. So, as we launch into this, firstly, I want to thank the VIPs in the room. So we've got Shane Rattenbury, Minister for Mental Health. We've got Rachel Stephen-Smith, Minister for Disability down there. We've got Amanda Bresnan, CEO of Community Mental Health Australia, which is our national peak body. We've got Professor Salvador-Carulla from the Centre of Mental Health Research at the ANU. Louis will be formally launching the report for us and reflecting on the experience here in the ACT, also from his point of trying to document it. Now, about the report, first and foremost, what we set out to do was to capture the experience rather than necessarily say that something is particularly good or bad. It's always to be expected when you introduce a huge new system such as the NDIS that there will be some challenges, and there certainly were some challenges. We're trying also to highlight, of course, the good things. There are some great stories, and you in the room who, I'm sure you've all been in contact with lots of people around this scheme and understand both the good stories and the not so good stories. What we wanted to capture in a way of giving a voice to the people who went through this experience was also what are the things that we still need to work on, the challenges that still need to be addressed. So we think overall we've got a fairly balanced view of the experience. It captures the 2 years of trial and the first year of what we refer to as the transition to full rollout. But of course, in the ACT, that really meant a year worth of everybody who was going to be in the scheme being in the scheme. We first started doing this report with a series of interviews back in 2016 and followed up with further interviews in 2017. And we've also captured lots of experience from both the conversations and the meetings that we had and the input that our stakeholders have given both to our own submissions to various inquiries and submissions from other organizations. So, we are very pleased to have produced this report, and we're pleased to have this event today and hope you will enjoy it. I should recognize the work of social work master's student Torsten Sadlier, who conducted the initial interviews and really set this work off on a good footing. So, with all of that, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Rattenbury up here to say a few words.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me welcome you to the ACT Legislative Assembly. I hope you enjoyed your day here. These estimates day, so if you see people looking stressed, that is what is going on, but I'm sure it'll be fine. I'd also like to particularly thank Simon for both the invitation and the acknowledgement of country. This is a very important part of Australia's learning what our true history was in this country and coming to terms with the great challenge we have to ensure better quality for Aboriginal people in Australia. I'd also particularly like to acknowledge my Assembly colleague Rachel Stephen-Smith, who is obviously in the ministry, but as Minister for Disability has the key leading role when it comes to the NDIS and the ACT. And whilst we do work on this together, Rachel really takes the primary responsibility, and I know is working very hard on ensuring that the ACT is one of the first jurisdictions that went into the scheme, is both making sure we adapt to it well, but also using our experience to share with other jurisdictions to make sure that they transition to as effectively as possible. Today is an opportunity to reflect particularly on the aspects of mental health when it comes to the NDIS, and I think the report prepared by the MHCC, and I was lucky to get a sneak copy yesterday, so I have had a chance to have a look, I think is a really important contribution to the discussion. I think the title of the document sums it up very well, A Story of Hope and Disruption in the Mental Health Sector. And certainly from the feedback that myself and the agency have received, this reflects very accurately the experience we've observed. That sense of real optimism and opportunity that sits with the NDIS, but certainly the upheaval that it has created. And for some people, a sense of reform fatigue that the NDIS has compounded in some cases. And I think that these are challenging issues, but ones that we need to really openly reflect on. The report does a great job of telling the story of people's lived experiences of the NDIS, and I congratulate the MHCC on putting together this work and taking the time to sit down and talk to people about their experiences, their stories, their perspective, and the reality of what it's like on the front line when it comes to dealing with the NDIS. And I think this is a valuable gathering of information from which we can learn a lot. I think in most people's eyes, the NDIS is not about mental health. I think if you ask the general members of the community, they don't see it as a big feature of the NDIS. It is a very important part. And that begs the question then of how we make sure that the mental health component of the NDIS doesn't get left behind or doesn't get sort of ignored in the discussion around how the scheme rolls out. And that's something I'm certainly very focused on. Some key issues really jump out of this report. And I don't want us to be allured, well, this is Thunder later when he makes some comments on launching this report, but a couple of key themes jumped out for me. One is the observations around the lack of data and analysis. And I think this is an issue in the mental health sector generally where I think we've really got some work to do to improve how we measure things. Getting rid of the things we don't need to count and really counting the things that we do need to count and doing it well, doing it consistently. And this leads to a second point, which is really starting to focus on outcomes rather than outputs. I know there's a general feature, and one of my frustrations with government performance reporting generally is that a lot of reporting is very much focused on how much goes in, how many people turn up, and not so much on how we actually measure whether something's been effective. And I think this is something we need to do both in terms of the NDIS and also in terms of general mental health funding, because we have so much demand in the mental health space. We need to make sure we are spending our resources in the right place. And if we are not getting a good sense of what's working and perhaps things that need a refresh or aren't relevant anymore, then we are not using our resources effectively as possible. And certainly as the Minister, I feel a great sense of responsibility to make sure that is what we are doing. And so I'm very keen, I'm pleased that that's picked up in this report, and it's an area I'm interested to work with the community sector on, is how we better measure what we're doing. The report also makes a very good analysis of the complexities and specificities of mental health when it comes to the NDIS. And I think that you don't need me to tell you about this, but the observations around issues of very definitions in the NDIS and how that is different when it comes to the mental health space, and the episodic nature of mental health can take on the recovery focus that we want to have in the mental health space, and how in many elements of the NDIS that is not what's being measured and not what the system is being built around. I think these are particular challenges for the mental health prism when it comes to scrutinising the NDIS. The report makes some really important points about workforce and the impact on organisations. The pressures that have been put on workforce in terms of the low prices that are being paid for some services, but therefore the lack of capacity for people to spend time and energy on training, professional development and the like. The churn that this is producing and the strain that this is putting on the not-for-profit organisations in particular. The whole NDIS is very premised on the not-for-profit sector playing an integral role, which is fine, except if the resources are not there to enable them to do that job professionally, then the system will struggle. And these are challenges that are there. Having said that, and I guess reflected on some of those areas that are the challenges, the report, I think, ultimately draws an interesting conclusion. I think it's a mixed result. And it speaks to that very clearly, a real sense of hope and optimism that for some people, the NDIS has undoubtedly made their lives better. It has empowered them, it's enabled them to access services in a way they weren't able to before. And for some people, that has been extremely successful. And I think that speaks to the vision that's encapsulated in the NDIS. And that's very exciting to see that side of it coming up. But there are clearly others who have struggled with the system, who feel worse off as a result, who have had packages that have gone up and down in sort of wild swings that are difficult to plan around. And I think that this is one of the real challenges ahead of us. Certainly the ACT is seeking to play our part very clearly in responding to some of those negative outcomes in some of those areas that are not working as people might have hoped. This is, as I touched on earlier, led by Rachel and the team from the Office of Disability, but certainly the ACT is jumping in and seeking to play a leading role in some of these areas. As many of you will know, last year the NDIS launched the new participant pathways, which are designed to overcome some of these challenges, and the ACT has nominated the trial of psychosocial disability pathway, which will be led by the NDIS. We're putting ourselves there at the front saying we want to be involved in trying to drive these improvements. Similarly, the government, through the Office of Disability, with assistance from the Mental Health Policy Unit, is leading the work on the mental health interface when it comes to dealing with those mainstream interface issues. And so again, you see, we are jumping in and saying we want to be involved in driving these improvements because we can see some of the challenges that are there, and we know that some people are falling through the cracks. For me, out of all of this, there's really two challenges. One is to deal with those who feel worse off and who have struggled to deal with bureaucracy. And the other is to recognise that only 10% of people with serious and enduring mental illness will be in the NDIS. And so as the Mental Health Minister, that says to me we've actually got to not just think, oh yeah, the NDIS will take care of it. We have to continue to drive improvement in the mental health sector. We have to acknowledge that most people who need support will not be getting NDIS support, and they'll need it from the ongoing services. And certainly that presents some challenges because the ACT government signing up to the NDIS signed across a whole lot of resources, as we well know. But I want to assure you that we understand very clearly that the mental health system still has a big job to do. And we simply cannot defer to the NDIS and assume that it'll all be okay. As no doubt you've observed, we're certainly not standing still when it comes to the mental health sector in the ACT. And the recent budget certainly had a significant investment when it comes to mental health. There was a 5% increase in expenditure in the ACT budget for mental health this year. And there's some really important issues, and I'm not going to sit here and rattle them all off, but there are a couple of things that I'm very pleased about that came through the budget process that I think will make a significant difference. First is the new investment in accommodation. It's clear through, as you know, I'm also the Minister for Corrections and a few other things, and I see some of these issues flow through, but the issue of gaps in accommodation, and particularly supported accommodation, are very significant when it comes to this sector. And so that's why we have rolled out this $22 million initiative over the next 4 years, which is a combination of capital and recurrent funding to do a couple of things: to build new houses that people who have long-term mental health issues but still have the capacity to live in the community with some degree of independence. There's a new model there so they can actually live as independently as possible but not be left alone, not left to the whims of coping with day-to-day life and some of the struggles that come with that. We're going to build a new step-up, step-down facility on the south side and extend elements of upgrade elements of Brian Hennessy House in order to ensure that it's a modern facility in the way that the community has expectations. The other one, and it is a partnership with the Mental Health Community Coalition, is the Recovery College. This to me is something new for the ACT. It's one that has taken a bit of push to get it across the line when it comes to funding, because it's perhaps an unproven model here. But it is an initiative I think can really work, and to me underlines what we have to be doing in the mental health space, which is being a little bit bold and being willing to try things that we aren't necessarily convinced will work, but perhaps can't absolutely confident. We have that real gut instinct that it's right. There's perhaps evidence base somewhere else, and we need to create a Canberra version of it to make it succeed. And I think the Recovery College is an example of that, where there is really proven data from other jurisdictions that this is a great model. But for me, it also is one of those things that will step into some different spaces. It's got a strong peer component to it, and I think it will really target people who aren't necessarily accessing mental health services at the moment and provide a new pathway of support and care for people that do need it. So I'm very optimistic about this. It's got 2 years of funding initially. I have said to Simone and the team from Mental Health Community Coalition that we need to get this cracking so that we can demonstrate that it's a really great model and that we can make the budget case in 2 years' time that it should continue. We might also have seen the Office of Mental Health is now operational here in the ACT. Now, many in this room have heard me speak about this a number of times, and it's taken some time to get it to this point of being operational, but I really appreciate the feedback people have given over time to help us shape that model right. And I don't want to put too much stead in it. I don't want to give it a sort of kiss of death from the start by generating too much expectation, but I really want to give the office a mandate to be a critical friend of government, to be an agitator, to be people who are restless and who don't accept that the status quo is good enough, and to actually continue to push us to make sure that we are innovating in the ACT mental health space in a way that is all about improving our services, about recognising we have some great stuff going on already, but we definitely have room for improvement. So with those few remarks, I'd like to simply conclude by saying welcome to the Assembly today. Congratulations to the Mental Health Community Coalition for putting together, I think, a really valuable resource in terms of understanding both what the NDIS has achieved and what it still has to do to achieve its true mandate. And I hope you all find it very, very valuable and interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shane. Let's say it's great to have a minister who not only is across the material, but also is willing to be bold and to work closely with the partners, both across government, but also in the community. It's now my pleasure to introduce Amanda Bresnan, CEO of Community Mental Health Australia. I've had the pleasure of working with Amanda over a period of time now, and she brings some fantastic skills to this space of advocacy for us in the mental health sector. Amanda will give us a bit of a picture of the national picture around both NDIS and a little bit beyond. Please welcome Amanda.
While we're waiting for the technology, just for people who, I think most people hopefully we're Community Mental Health Australians, but we're a coalition of each of the state and territory mental health peaks across the country. So I very much hear about what's obviously happening in the ACT, but also across the country, and seeing, I think, what some of those systemic issues are. And the thing I was just going to point out in light of the report today is that I often refer to the ACT in the various NDIS meetings I go to and other meetings, and particularly because I think the ACT, as has already been mentioned this morning, it's a population where you can actually get it right, but also if we're seeing things that are happening in learning lessons, we should be learning from those, and that we shouldn't then be repeating the same things across the country. And I think, unfortunately, enough attention hasn't been paid to what happened in the ACT, so I think this report's going to be an absolutely valuable contribution. I think we'll get quite a bit of interest from various, particularly probably some NDIA, I would say. So as has already been mentioned, what as I've tried to do in the presentation today is to talk about what are some of the issues and some of the, I guess, key developments that have happened across the country that are impacting, and probably also to note the things that are highlighted in the report here in the ACT are being felt across the country. And I think we're seeing some of those systemic things coming out. So what I've got here, what are the key issues still there? I mean, there are a range of issues, but I think these are some of the things that are highlighted in the report too, particularly around workforce. I think this is a really key issue. And then I think it relates to quality and safety issues and the availability of services, and all those things obviously run into each other. And as is mentioned, I mean, the thing, and it's already been noted this morning, that mental health has worked very hard to develop that recovery-oriented model, to develop a qualified workforce. And I think, again, which we put out, no one has been saying the past system is perfect from it, but we did actually have a workforce that a lot of time and approach has been taken to develop. And the concerns that obviously the workforce that is emerging out of the NDIS, and particularly its price structure, is becoming a more generalist type of service, and that we are going to start losing, and probably are already losing in many places, that expertise and that qualified workforce that's taken a long time to develop. And then, as I've mentioned there, that impacts quality and safety. And that's what the NDIS is meant to be about, but it is going to impact that, particularly if we've got a more generalist workforce. So here I've just got about this, and many of you will be aware of these already, but I think it's just we're sort of going to look at what are the things that are happening now. Obviously, we've had the McKinsey independent price review, and I think I have noted later on that they haven't talked about what has come out, but the NDIS just put out a communication, I think it was end of last week, stating that the new price index will be coming out soon. And that all those recommendations that were in McKinsey will be a part of that. The establishment of the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, I think, is quite a big development in terms of, and I think it offers a lot of potential. It's just going to see if that potential can be fulfilled and harnessed. Obviously, the 80 million for psychosocial supports for people not eligible for NDIS, and again, we'll note that obviously just on the weekend there was the announcement that all states and territories had agreed to that, and that obviously have all agreed to match that, and the continued support funding, which was in just the most recent federal budget for people who are currently in those federal programs going to NDIS but won't be eligible for the NDIS. So that's been, we still don't actually have, I think, a clearly articulated policy about how that's going to work, but it was good that we at least had an announcement in the budget and some dollars put for that. With McKinsey, again, I'll try and go through this relatively quickly, but the key things there obviously about adding that third tier of complexity rating of 10% for high levels of skill and experience. Would note, however, that we still don't have a specific reference to psychosocial disability or mental health, so we're talking about complexity but not actually talking about mental health, which I still think is an issue, and particularly in terms of, I guess anecdotally hearing that 10% is probably not going to be enough to actually cover that expertise. But again, I guess it's something. The implementation of the temporary price supplement on attendant care. So that's another 2 to 3% for 12 months. And as the review has noted, that there would have to be a review of this after the 12 months to determine if it needs to continue. Again, I think the key thing is that actually going to be adequate to cover the issues we're seeing. And it is, again, it's only for 12 months. So seeing how that works. And I thought I'd just put this here because this was a quote from the report, and it stated that deregulation of pricing remains an appropriate goal, but there is yet a clear path towards reaching it. I think that's the really key thing when we're talking about markets. We're still saying, yes, that's what we need to pursue, but we don't have a pathway how to get there. And that was, I think, a somewhat concerning quote to be in there. But, I mean, I guess at least an acknowledgement, we don't know how we're getting there, but I think it's still quite a concern when we're talking about a market. But as I keep saying, we're talking about people. So let's remember that. And as it noted already, that the NDIS never agreed with all the recommendations, and that was just recently noted in that announcement that the new price structure will be coming out soon. So we'll see how that goes in the implementation. As I mentioned, I think quite a significant development is the establishment of Quality and Safeguards Commission, and Graham Head has been appointed the Commissioner. Most of you probably have about the time frame. So South Australia and New South Wales will start this year. So 1st July this year, the Commission will start operating there. I've just noted I've put WA first because that's from 2020, because that's obviously in terms of their now going into having their own scheme, they're going into the national scheme, and the remaining states and territories of half of this is from New South Wales, South Australia, WA, from 2019. So the Commission obviously said it's meant to establish a consistent process of addressing complaints and oversight. I think in that there's still a bit of a lack of clarity. I went to a forum recently about advocacy and how that relates to the Quality and Safeguards Commission, about how some of those schemes were like official visitors and community visitors will fit within that structure, because the Commission, that's not their role. They're a complaints and oversight body, but they don't actually fulfil that role that official visitor schemes fulfil. And I think they're having an interesting debate, it seems, in New South Wales about whether it continues, the official visit, which, again, we've got to remember all those people who won't be in the NDIS, and that there still needs to be that quality and safety and oversight there. So that's going to be, I think, what's the word, a moving feast, as we see that. But I think it's really important for us that those sorts of mechanisms have to continue. So we'll see what happens. And again, I think the New South Wales decision appears has been based on a state funding decision. So I think there'll be probably a lot of advocacy about continuing that role. They'll be responsible for registrations if they have a small market oversight role. Again, I think how that will actually work is yet to be seen. It will obviously relate to the quality and safety aspect, but again, I think there's a lot of potential with this commission to do some good things, to highlight best practice. Again, it's going to be thinking implementation, and there does appear to be willingness to work with the community of it, so hopefully that will have some potential positive aspects there. And again, they're responsible for a whole range of processes that sit under that. There's a quality, there's a code of conduct, worker screening, practice standards, all those things, and complaints. So they've got quite a big job in front of them. In relation to that term, this is one of the things we've raised, is that training will be required by providers in all the various processes, but as we know, the NDIS doesn't include training of compliance costs and the price structure. That's an issue which has been raised in many forums, and I think that's where, who develops the training, I think that's where the Commission would have a role to actually develop training that can then be given to providers and to workers, so that we don't have a doubling up process, but also that we recognise that it's not within the price structure. I think there is a recognition there in the Commission. Again, it's going to be whether or not that is developed as it should. And again, the point there that the sector's already under extreme pressure when we put in place all these new processes around compliance and training. That's going to have an added impact. So there has to be that recognition in how this develops. As I said, it's very soon for South Australia to be New South Wales, 1st July this year. So that's going to be, again, probably with the ACT, with the role of the NDIS, a bit of a test case about how this is going to develop. The key point I've got there, which we contend that the NDIA and their partners, such as LIC, will not be subject to the commission. We contend that they should, because the commission have already said that they know probably most of the complaints they will get will be about the NDIS. And I think particularly given their crucial role in the planning process, and again with LACs and the planning and assessment process, that's probably going to be one of the biggest impacts on what sorts of services people get. And again, I think, like I said, we continue that they should also be subject to these processes, but they currently aren't in the Act. One of the things I think this relates to quality and safety too is about that recognition, and I know that's in the report, is about articulating and recognising complexity. And there's some of the process and documents that NDA Quality Safeguards Commission now on our consultation on their website. We've been through input from the states and territories, been providing quite a bit of input since about end of last year. I think the versions up there are better than what they were, because they've used quite a lot of case studies to demonstrate compliance and those sorts of things, and they really didn't articulate what people were actually going to be dealing with every day. And we actually worked up a case study with one of the state and territory peaks and the provider to say to them, this is the sort of thing you actually should be talking about, and trying to demonstrate that in a practical way, because that's going to be that key thing too. If we're getting workers and providers in there who are more generalist providers, actually understanding that, and again going to that compliance and the code of conduct. How do people actually comply with that if they don't actually understand the situation they're going to be dealing with? And that again affects how those processes are implemented. And this, I'll go to this quickly because it's all well aware of this. This was just a case study. We went to try to talk about the sorts of things that might happen, and we talked about a father and a son living together. We both, one had an NDIS package, both with lived experience of disability, and a worker coming in and noticing on a very hot day that there's no air conditioning on, that there's no fan on, and that the person's dressed in clothing that would exacerbate that, and that the support worker goes and doesn't actually do anything about it, then gets a call to say that this person's been hospitalised. And that then this would, sorry, I'm going to use the apology, but that this would result in a notifiable incident, which the Commission has oversight of, that they then put in place processes that are a result of this sort of situation occurring. And again, that this is the sort of thing that's been communicated to workers, and that they understand this sort of action would result in compliance, that it might result in an action from the NJ and also against the worker. So, and they have actually used the case study, which is good. And the case studies are better, but again, I think it's a work in progress that they are actually listening to this sort of stuff. Again, this is absolutely a key issue. I think the ACT experience has shown us that peer support and advocacy is absolutely crucial. And I think the thing I've heard from, I guess because I hear stories from across the country, the thing I've heard from the ACT but also across the country is that where people have had good outcomes, it's been because they've had supported decision making, it's been a part of that it's been a peer worker, it's been an advocate, it's crucial, or it's been someone there with them, getting them through that process. So I think supported decision making, and where people want that, again, I think it's that crucial thing, where people ask that and want it, it should be there for them. And that's, again, I think that role of state and territory governments have an absolutely crucial role there to fund advocacy. Federal government also has a role, so I think it's that thing where state, territory, and federal governments are more responsible for this area. That we should also be upskilling the mental health workforce to do this, and that the peer workforce has a crucial role, central role to play this, and has to be a part of it. And again, I think the thing which gets talked about a bit, but probably not enough, I think this is support for families and carers. And obviously we've got a new program federally happening around support for carers at the moment. I think there's a few concerns about that as well, about how that's going to roll out. And again, I think we have those links between NDIS and other types of reforms haven't really been well established. But again, it's absolutely crucial to what happens. One of the biggest concerns for us too is what happens to those people outside of the NDIS, and as has already been mentioned, it's only a small percentage, and particularly to I think that intersection between chronic health and health in general. And I think where we've seen some, particularly I think stories of her across the country, some negative outcomes is where there's been that intersection and it's not well understood or dealt with by the NDIS. And again, it's one of those things where people go, it's not my responsibility, it's health, it's a state job, but how do you separate out the two? And in more circumstances than not, there is going to be co-occurring conditions. Obviously, as we already know, it's in the report about the federal programs such as FAMS and Power, day-to-day living, transitioning to the NDIS, where most of those people in those programs aren't going to be eligible for the NDIS. And the interface, again, I think it's those interface issues. And the Productivity Commission, I think, who did a good report on looking at NDIS costs and really drew out some of these issues, talked about that interface with mainstream services. And particularly, I think the recommendation they made that until we actually really understand what is happening with the transition of programs, but also people that sit across both mental health, disability and health, till we actually have a strong picture of what will happen to people when they either don't go in or out, that funding that is already sitting there should not be removed. And I think, again, probably ACT is a good example of that. And it's a really, I think that is particularly, again, as relating to those quality and safeguards processes, keep talking about what we have consistency, it's going to be about the NDIS, and at this point people are saying, well, what about people who aren't in the NDIS? Why is their quality and safety not as important? So actually, and about those sorts of schemes that look at across those two systems continuing. I'll put this up because even about sort of funding streams, even when I've been to things where there's been people who are fairly experienced and they still are confused about probably what is happening with some of the federal, probably particularly the federal funding. And I think it's, when we talk about pathways as well, about recognising that it's not a nice neat pathway. And it's great, I think, and we'll acknowledge that the NJ have done the work on the pathway, and it's great that the psychosocial pathway will be trialled here in the ACT, but recognising people move in and out, it's not a nice neat picture. And then all these different pools of funding to people are potentially going to cross all of these, and we need to recognise that. So obviously, when we look at that pathway, there is the NJS, obviously, it's obvious, but then the PHNs have a crucial central role in all of this as well, particularly because they're getting quite a bit of funding. So the National Psychosocial Support Scheme, that's the 80 million or the 160 million across the country, but the federal component of that will sit with the NJ, with the PHNs. So that's their role there. Continued support, I've already mentioned, which was announced in the most recent federal budget, that will also sit with the PHNs. So they're going to have a crucial role. And I think worth pointing out the continued support is, I'll say only, because it's 8,800 people across the country, so that's not a lot of people. And that's the federal estimates. There's a lot of debate about the estimates. It's debate continuing to have at various meetings about people in those federal programs who are getting into NDIS. Because I think the numbers are based on probably what we estimated, but again, it's in that implementation about who are actually getting in. And again, state and territory services, and I put where they exist, because somewhere like Victoria, where all their community mental health funding went to the NDIS, they don't have a sector where there's going to be significant gaps for the people, because essentially their community system is gone. So, just to note, we developed it in relation to that community support, but I think it actually relates to a couple of things. We developed position statements in absence of there being a clearly articulated policy of how continuous support actually work, and it still is a bit unclear. We know it's going to be PHNs, but I think how it's going to work in practice is we still need to see how that's going to work. About noting that the federal government should actually be adhering to what they stated this was to achieve, and that it was to support people to receive the same outcomes, even if it's changed, arrangements change over time, but they need to actually be adhering to this. And I think in what I've heard articulated already, I think we have some concerns about that. Then again, there needs to be those links, as I've already said, between the NDIS and all parts of the system, and about the recognition. It's not a nice neat pathway that people will move in and out. We have to recognise that it's not going to work in a neat way. We've said this here because a couple of people raised this and I thought completely agree that we contend that people should not be have to test their eligibility for the NDIS to access continuity support. That actually convenes the rights of people with disability, and it potentially puts people through a very stressful, long process where there'll be delays, where they won't have access to services when they shouldn't actually be going through that process. There does seem to be, I think, a little bit of movement on this, maybe particularly around people who not have the capacity to test their eligibility, but I still think, again, I think it relates to what the federal government said continuity support was there before. And if you're testing eligibility, actually, I think it's actually adhering to that statement. That people, again, if people want it, if they want support to coordinate plan, that's whether you're in the NDIS or not, you should be provided with that, whether it's short or long term. Again, supported decision making, it's crucial, and that's advocates, key workers, it's whatever the person needs, that should be provided to them so that they get the outcomes they deserve. And in particular, I think that this relates primarily to outside NDIS, that we don't start creating a second class of clients that have different time frames, that have different processes, referral processes that don't have, I guess, like a quality and safeguards process applied to it. I've put this up here because in relation to data, and particularly which has been raised, and that is a really key concern. We've just been successful getting a grant through the National Mental Health Commission. We'll be working with the University of Sydney, and the reason we're working with them is because we did the Mind the Gap report with them, which caused a bit of a stir. And because, so we're following the right process around making sure the data is collected properly, ethical processes approval it, so that we can be confident in that. And it will be done over a year, producing quarterly public reports, looking at the transition of PIR fans and day-to-day living clients into the NDIS. In particular, so looking at what happens to people outside. The Commission have been very clear that they want a representative sample across the country, because I think, again, because I talk to different states and territories, someone like the NT do feel like they're being forgotten quite a bit. So I think it's making sure they're included, but making sure all states and territories are part of that. And again, it's about trying to provide us not an alternative picture, but another picture of what's happening in engaging with data from providers and people and their clients. Because I think we need that alternative picture. And it's not saying what the NDIS or departments might be putting out is not valid, but it is, it's all part of the picture. In particular, I said, looking at issues around the NDIS application process, what are the reasons for eligibility? Are there unscheduled reviews occurring, appeals? And particularly what we want to try and do is when people aren't eligible, where do they get referred to, so we can actually start getting an understanding of that, because I think that's particularly looking at the fans and PI monitoring and talking to the department, there's no real idea of what is happening to people particularly who aren't eligible. They just don't seem to know. I think that's highly concerning. I've got one last slide, and then I'll put this up too because Mental Health Australia are managing a project with a number of providers, which I've listed there, which is looking at the types of packages within the NDIS and about, I think, looking at what might be some alternatives as it's rolled out. And CMHCC are involved with that, so with Mental Health Fellowship of Australia, I should say. And I think there is a web page on the Mental Health Australia website. I'd encourage people to go and look at that because there is an email there where people can actually provide input. I think it'd be great for ACT consumers and also providers to provide some input there because that's going to be crucial, I think, in terms of looking at what are the sorts of packages that are developed. So I would encourage people to do that. And I've also just listed just the last slide is my email for anyone. I'm happy for people to email me at any time, but also suggest people go look at the Quality and Safeguards Commission website as well. Just look at some of the processes that are being established there. As I said, it'll be in the ACT next year, but they do seem willing to engage. So again, encourage people to get in there and provide input and be part of that.
I'd like to ask if anyone would like to ask any questions or make any comments or go through the stand up, please introduce yourself and speak loudly.
My name's Shobha Vaki and I'm Vice President of Prisoners Aid. I think Peter Dwyer keeps telling me this and I tend to agree with him, and Trent just walked out, but he agrees with it too. 80% of people who are inside the Alexander McConaughey Centre have mental health issues. How does the NDIS and what recommendations would you give them, NDIA, to ensure that people don't fall out? Now, before they get locked up, if they have an NDIS plan, how does that work? And when they're inside, what happens to that plan? And when they come out of jail, what happens to that plan? And we've grown from 300, we now have 508 people locked up, and women have gone up from 18 to 38. So it's not a good trend. So what would be your comments? What can we do about it?
Yeah, so there's been quite a bit of discussion about this, particularly I think because I think it was last year we actually put in some questions through the parliamentary process around this because it was very unclear about what if someone did have a package where there are aspects of it that continued and what didn't. And again, it's getting down to this health, disability, corrections crossover. I understand there's some aspects that would continue. Again, it's not clear what that would be, but they are, I understand, developing a policy around this area. It's still not there and there's still some way to go, but there's also Australian Justice Network that involves or Disability Justice Network that I've been a part of. And they're doing quite a bit of strong advocacy around this, particularly in relation to a case in Victoria where someone had been sitting in remand for months, basically, because they couldn't, again, because of the price structure, a number of providers saying we can't do that, we can't provide it within the price structure because of the complexity. So those issues are still sitting there. The price review didn't address that at all. And there's been no answers provided by the NDIA about it. It's actually, again, it's like we said, and as the Productivity Commission said, there's all these other systems that are intersecting with it, and we are not actually dealing with that crossover. And I think corrections not at all. So it's something through that network, they've provided some very strong advocacy, and particularly for that Senate inquiry that was done a couple of years ago, put in a very strong submission, which we supported around that, and I attended when they had actually a special session around those issues. So it's something that people are aware of about how we actually deal with it. The NDIA, I know, have said when there are those particular cases where people are literally sitting there, I know that they have taken on the responsibility to actually get people out of the prison system, get them the package. And again, it's what happens when people go in and out. And I think now an added complication is the provision that was in the most recent budget about reducing the period people can access DSP as well. I think that's quite concerning because it will impact the same sorts of people. So if that, and again, there's quite a bit of advocacy happening around that. So I can't provide a clear answer, but there is a lot of advocacy about saying we need to actually work out, again, with that health intersected, how is this actually going to cross over with people moving in and out? So people aren't getting a package and coming back out and having to wait months. And like I said, that DSP thing puts a further complication there, if that passes, hopefully it won't.
Okay, we need to, sorry, we'll have time during the day for more questions, but we need to move on now. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. And if you didn't think it was complicated already, then, well, that certainly showed you just about how complicated this whole thing is. Now we come to our final speaker for the morning session, Professor Salvador-Carulla. And we're really pleased to have Louis here and speaking to us both to officially launch the report and speaking about his experiences in trying to also map the sector while it was going through this change. So please welcome Professor.
Thank you, Simon, for inviting me to participate in such an exciting meeting and for the launch of this report that I think provides a very serious, in-depth analysis of the situation of the implementation of NDIS in relation to people with mental problems. And I would like to start by explaining 4 histories of failure and 1 history of success that it's related to something happening here in Canberra in the next days, but not to disability or mental disorders. It's the commemoration of the Battle of Hamel in the First World War. It happened in the 4th of July 2018, and it's going to be commemorated at the War Museum during the next week. This battle was essential to understand how we deal with the world today. And it was Monash who did something very special. He put together data. He started to plan this battle, knowing the number of tanks, the number of the army soldiers, the type of machines, the logistics of how to get there, how he was going to involve the American army that just arrived to the battlefield with the highly trained Australian forces in this battle. And he used data. He used huge amounts of data to plan this battle that happened in, I think, 90 minutes. And that involved very new technology, tanks, different armies, and contingencies and questions that couldn't be handled, because he was really dealing with a very complex situation. And one of the things that happened is that 4 hours before the offensive started, the American general said that he was not participating in it. So he had just to handle things that, in spite of working with this huge amount of data, he was not able to control. Finally, he managed how to convince the American general, and he did an offensive in the First World War that was critical for the outcome of the war. So what happened is that really the use of big data for planning and for understanding reality and complexity started in Australia and started by this work by Monash. This was a history of success, and it was followed by a history of failure. And the history of failure is one of the most influencer people that in the history of the 20th century where we are today. His name is Robert McNamara. You may know him because of his involvement in the Vietnam War. But he was the one who really provided the knowledge of big data for planning the logistics of the bombing of Japan that was very successful in the Second World War. And then he applied it to car manufacturing. And then he was called by Robert Kennedy, by John F. Kennedy, because of his knowledge of data. And he was applying this big data analysis to the Vietnam War. And by 1965 or 64, he was convinced that this war could be won. So he decided to tell Lyndon B. Johnson that they have to go away from Vietnam and get an agreement with the North Vietnamese. What happened then is he was replaced, he went to the World Bank, and the war continued 10 years more, and double number of American soldiers, and huge amounts of people in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam died. And the thing is that he knew from his big data analysis what has to be done, but he was not able to implement it. He was forecasting what was going to happen, but he couldn't do anything. And he didn't mention that in the next 30 years after he was replaced as Secretary of Defense. So big data is not enough. There is a second history there, that probably if he would have taken into account the accounts and the histories and the narratives of the journalists and the soldiers who were on the ground, he could have arrived to the same conclusion 1 year before, and he knew it. So what happens is that mixing quantitative and qualitative data is the way we can go forward in planning. And unfortunately, this is not happening in the NDIS implementation. And we have three major documents that provide an idea of what is happening. One is the Mind the Gap report produced by Amanda, my colleague Jenny Smith-Mary, by their joint effort on developing that. This is a qualitative report of based on 58, I think, interviews to major organizations, managers, and people involved, and stakeholders that describes problems in the system. This is followed by the atlas that we developed from University of Sydney and ANU of the mental health care provision in Canberra, in ACT, where we got a major support from many of you, particularly Simon, who was working closely with us in the development of the atlas. And it ends with this report that we are launching today on the situation of NDIS in ACT. The next one. And we have figures that were provided by the NDIS and the original estimates of what would be the people that should receive attention in relation to the NDIS. There was a first estimate that this would be around 900 people in Canberra. We now know that it's around 6,000 the people that are in need of support from the NDIS. So there was an underestimate of what was the real extension of these problems and the real need of the population with disabilities. The next one. And this is related to the third story of failure, and it's my story of coming to Australia. I came to Australia in 2012 to work at the Centre for Disability Research and Policy at the University of Sydney, where Jenny Smith-Mary is working with, just to develop a advice plan for the enrollment of the NDIS and the rollout of the system and the planning. And what happened is that the University of Sydney put together an incredible group of people who have worked on areas related to disabilities. In my case, I was advisor for the development of the disability scheme in Spain, and in relation particularly of how to incorporate to this plan severe mental illness. So when I arrived here, I was very optimistic that this part of my work that is related to disabilities and mental health would be my major work here in Australia. What happened is that we didn't receive any funding from the NDIS at this group at the University of Sydney. There was another university that was won the tender to support all the assessment process. And unfortunately, this university, this group, didn't have any real experience on the policy and the very complex aspects of the development of a disability scheme. So in 2014, we published from the University of Sydney a comment to our paper on what was going to happen with the NDIS in people with a mental health problem. And what we were explaining was based on my experience in Europe. And the thing is that in order to develop the disability scheme in Spain, we were also analyzing what was happening in other European countries, what happening in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the Scandinavian countries, how all these programs that were recommended by the European Council were deployed in every country. And there were many things that were crystal clear in this development, and are written in this paper of 2015. One of them is that we have to be very aware of the context of care to understand how we implement a system. And there are two fundamental things. There should be a close collaboration between health and the social sector. And the second, it should be also, we will need also a close collaboration between aging and disability to develop that type of programs. In the European countries where this has succeeded, it was because from the very beginning, health and social were working together. And there was this link also between aging and disability. The second thing is that we need a mapping of the service provision prior to the implementation of the program. We need to know what is there. Following this Monash approach, you cannot plan things if you don't really know what is on the ground. And the fact was that we didn't know it. We had no idea. And I had 2 meetings with the NDIS and 2 requests to develop a map, an analysis of the service delivery before the implementation of NDIS, and this didn't happen. We need to know the map of the disability services and the mental health services to understand how the people with a mental problem will be eligible and participating in the program. Then we need a standard description of the programs and the interventions that will be part of the system. We need an analysis of efficiency of different approaches and benchmarking. Who are doing the things where, which organization is having the best approach to that? How can the others learn from the benchmark? And there were problems related to population and clinical evaluation. It's very complex to develop all the standard criteria for eligibility of people with a mental disorders in that type of program. And this is a major focus of attention before you start the scheme. We need tools for case mix, risk pooling, and stratification of the people who are going to be involved in the program. And we need to have a very good estimate of the cases needed to support. And there is always an underestimate. It has happened in the development of any program or any disability scheme. And then we have to know the economics and the financial flows that Amanda was mentioning before. There has been an underestimation, of course, and this was underscored by the Center for Disability Research and Policy in a major meeting in 2013. And we need the modeling and the mapping of the financial flows, how the system is funded, how it's related to other sources of funding for target populations, etc. And finally, there is a need for training. We need specific programs for professionals and frontline carers, and increase the disability literacy of the population. These major things were crystal clear from all the development of disability schemes in many countries, and it was not taken into account. This is called the Cassandra effect. It's when you are in a place, you see something, you start to talk about this, you publish it, and you see that nothing is happening. That you are in a sort of Titanic going to the iceberg, and you cannot do anything. And it was terribly frustrating for me, having lived the problems of the disability, of a disability scheme in Europe, seeing it again happening in my new country, and seeing what was coming. And it was very frustrating for me. So due to the lack of funding in the area of disability research and to the problems I was seeing, I decided to move again to my other hat that was mental health policy planning. And this was very successful, and I've been working in the last years on developing better tools for mental health policy in general. And now we have the information, and we are starting to have what I was seeing in 2013, 2014 as something that is really happening. And the major contribution for that has been this report, the Mind the Gap report developed by our colleagues at the Center for Disability Research and Community Mental Health Australia. I think it's a wonderful report. What it's saying is that there are gaps identified in the administration of the scheme in relation to the engagement in the process and in the full assessment and the development of the plans, as well as in the service delivery for people who are falling in the cracks of the system, who do not fit the specific criteria of the NDIS that were not very well defined from the very beginning for the reasons I mentioned before. The next one. And there are things that are particularly related to the engagement and the application process mentioned in the report. The problem of language. The language was developed for physical disabilities, was not taking into account the highly complex issues of the changes in the severity of the process and the concepts of what is permanence from the point of view of a person with a psychosocial disability, etc. We had a huge problem of language. There was a problem on social and geographical issues and the accessibility to care, the availability of the service provision, difficulties in gathering the evidence that was required. As I was saying, we were putting forward proposals by the month from the Center for Disability Research and Policy that were not approved. Not a single one during these first years was approved to develop a comparative approach. Just look at what has happened in other places. Let's make an analysis of what services are there. What is the workforce capacity? We were not able to get the funding for that. And then there is a poor understanding among carers and family of the scheme and the way the supports work, and there is not a proper regard of the carer and family expertise in this development. Next one. And then we have also all these problems in the assessment, the planning, and the plan activation and the review of the planning process. The problem of the planners who lack the expertise in the psychosocial field, the problems of time delays and the logistics of how we implement the things, the lack of support for planning and supporters that are prevented contributing properly to the elaboration of the plan, cost-related issues that were not taken into account when the process started, plans that are not properly activated, and the problem of if you are transforming a system that is based on NGOs, non-profit approaches, to a market economy, we have a lot of problems. And things are happening in the system that are related to problems of organizations that may try to benefit from the opportunities from a market perspective, not from a perspective of increasing the well-being and the integration of people with severe problems. Next one. And then we have all these problems of the service delivery for those living with severe mental illness who are not eligible for the program because the eligibility criteria were not properly developed. And this has been commented before, so I go to the next one. And what happened? We had this marvelous report just explaining your problems the system had. that everyone who has been involved knew. And what was the response of the NDIA? Well, many of you may know this response was very discouraging. They say that the facts that underpin the approach taken in the report are inaccurate or have been misrepresented. They said the report does not use a transparent and balanced care of sources. The sample of organizations cited as being contributing stakeholders, organizations, and programs is not representative of the proportion of NDIS participants. The report fails to acknowledge that almost all issues raised in the report are already being addressed by the NDIA. This was very discouraging, and I can imagine, I knew from Jenny Smith-Mary how she felt when she received that, because it was just saying that there was no scientific value on what was said. Of course, it was a qualitative approach. Of course, it needed more quantitative data. But we were denied to the access of funding for gathering the quantitative data once and again through many years, over 4 or 5 years. So this is a sort of recursive argument. You are not allowing you to have the quantitative data. And when you gather what you can, that is qualitative, you are said that you are not providing the proper evidence that this cannot be generalized, which is not true, because qualitative information is very important, but of course it needs the quantitative part apart from this. The other thing is that the most serious thing about that is a denial of the problems. That's my major concern. My major concern is not that the NDIS is not working well. My major concern is that the main decision body in the system is not recognizing where are the problems. And if you are not recognizing the problems, you are not able to fix them. The next one. Yeah. What happens? We are in ACT. And one of the things that this report brings is the huge effort that has been done by many organizations, the NGOs, the decision-making bodies in ACT to overcome the problems that the NDIS and the NDIA have. And ACT is an ideal place to try to overcome these problems, taking into account that we were a pilot site. It's a very specific jurisdiction that has characteristics that allow it, federal state, to provide alternative solutions and to provide information that can really change the current path in the NDIS. The next one. And this is where we started to have some data, quantitative data of what was happening. And it was by coincidence. I left the field of working in disability and the NDIS because it was very frustrating for me, and I moved to general mental health planning. And it was by working in mental health planning that, again, the problem of NDIS came out again. And it was because we were just preparing the Atlas of Mental Health Care Provision here, starting in June 2016. And we did it through 6 months. So we got this period of transition. It was not planned, we just got it. And what happened, the next one, is that we were using this system to analyze, with a classification of service, the mapping of the services for mental health. We developed this integrated mental health atlas that will be released shortly. We identified gaps, duplications, and potential barriers in the system. Eventually, we would be able to assess it with a need assessment as the one we had in Western Sydney for the PIR program. The next one. And we were able, using an international taxonomy of service provision, to compare the availability of services with Sydney, with Melbourne, with Perth, with Helsinki, with Bilbao, with other places in the world. So we started to understand how the system worked and what were the characteristics of Canberra that were different from other places. The next one. And that's the pattern of the care provision in ACT, what we saw that there was a huge amount of individual services for care coordination in our system. That there was problems in the support accommodation area, problems in the daycare provision. And these things could be seen very clearly when we compare this pattern of care provision with the pattern of care provision of other places like North Perth or Helsinki in Europe. And the other thing is that the importance of the NGO sector here was very significant, far more than it is in other areas, for instance, in other urban areas of Australia, like Greater Sydney. And the only place where we have a similar proportion of NGOs working and playing a major role in the system was North Perth. So what it gave is a highly complex picture and an idea that if something was happening that was impacting the NGO system, this would have a particular impact in ACT higher than in other places in Australia. The next one. And then we came across again, I encountered NDIS issues again in my life. And it was because when we were doing these interviews with the managers of organizations, and we interviewed 93% of all the organizations in Canberra, what we saw is that there was a major distress in the organizations caused by the NDIS. As a matter of fact, the organizations were not able to provide a management plan for the next 6 months, not to say for 3 years. So the level of disruption in the system was so high that we had to stop the mapping of the services, wait 3 months, and restart it again, because many of the organizations were telling us, we don't know, we have no idea of how this is going to be developed in a proper way. So it was a major disruption in the NGOs of a system that is characterized by a major role of NGOs in the provision of care. So what we had was not a rollout of a disability scheme. We had a major transformation, a major reform of the mental health system happening without being aware that this was the case. And what we have still on is a reform of the system. It's as if there was a general plan that is telling us that we will have a completely different system for mental health care than what we had before 2016. And we have just revised this, and this is the first information where we have quantitative data of what is happening in local levels. And the thing is that we need that. We need quantitative information, because this is the one that really changes the thing. Qualitative information provides us the general framework, but we need to demonstrate it. This is what NDIA was saying. Where is the evidence? You should provide us evidence. Of course, they are not delivering it, so we don't have it. The next one. Yes. So we had a series of issues on what were the main aspects of the atlas. I will not enter there. I will just share with you these slides. They are very similar to what was reported in the Mind the Gap report. The next one. And then we have the ACT report, and it was such a good coincidence to be able to read the preliminary report and see how many things that we have found unexpectedly in a non-related study were corroborated by the independent study carried out in the NDIS ACT report by the Mental Health Community Coalition, ACT. And the problems were related to communication difficulties, the challenges of the changes and the reversals in the problem, and the problems in the review and the deployment of individual funding packages. The next one. And we had, thanks to this report, information on the experience of providers and experiences of consumers and carers. And the problems were the transfer of risk to the service, the risk the financial risks were transferred to the service provider. So that was part of this huge distress on the NGOs when we were preparing the interviews for the atlas. There was a problem on adapting to the way the system was running now, the online system, the pricing structure, the gaps and the closures of services available, how to build in a recovery approach to the NDIS plans that were developed for a permanent condition, the problem of unfunded and billable work that has to be done in psychosocial disabilities, and the workforce concerns that were related to a general de-skilling of the capacity of the workforce that had a huge level of experience and could not be contracted anymore because of the funding scheme. The next one. And then the experience of consumers with the barriers caused by the deficit focus of the NDIS in relation to a recovery focus, the caution and distrust due to a history of negative interaction with the agencies, providers, the fact that the carers were excluded from the decision process, and the lack of support of all carers, in particularly when there was a withdrawal of the carer services. The next one, and we have common gaps that there is a huge difference in the philosophy of care in the NDIS and the philosophy of care we have in mental health. There is a poor knowledge of the planners. There is exclusion of support people, problems around pricing, problems of this transition to a market economy in an area where markets are not interested, the service closing, and hopefully we are able to reassess the availability and the service map of mental health services in ACT. We will be able to document the huge change that has happened and the downgrading of the staff funding experience and qualifications. But what is there is that we are in a very good place to refocus and change what is happening. As Monash did, what we have to do is to put together all the information and to work in ACT to get the best from NDIS and to get the necessary and the complementary service delivery in ACT. And this is feasible. We can do that. Monash did it in a highly complex situation. The only thing we have to know is that, I would say, and I'm saying it on streaming, that we have not to rely on NDIA and on DIS. I don't know if there's someone here there. I'm sorry to say that. I am not in the government, so I can say it. It will be our own capacity and our own responsibility to overcome the challenges and the barriers. We have been talking about the good examples and the good cases. But we don't have evidence on that as well. We have examples and cases from a qualitative approach. We need access to the data of the NDIS. We need to develop a proper advocacy program and to take again and empower the organizations, the consumers, and the stakeholders of the territory to overcome the problems and make life of people with a psychosocial disability better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Salvador. I think we don't really have time for questions at the moment, but we've got a 15-minute break for morning Tina, so I'm sure you can ask any questions directly to them. And with that, the report is
When I was studying